The cabin lights hummed overhead as passengers settled into their seats. Conversations blended with the soft thrum of the aircraft's ventilation system. Near the front row, a woman in a Navy uniform stepped forward with clipped footsteps that echoed authority before she even spoke. "Sir, you'll need to move to the back," she said, her tone flat and rehearsed. "This section is reserved for first-class travelers." Her name, tag, read Lauren Reed, senior flight attendant. Her shoulders were squared. Her confidence seemed carved from years of giving orders no one questioned. The man she spoke to didn't look flustered. David Lawson, wearing a simple charcoal sweatshirt and dark jeans, slowly lifted his gaze from his phone. His expression was calm, almost too calm for the tension forming around his row. "Is there a problem?" he asked mildly. Lauren tightened her jaw. "You're sitting in a first-class seat. This is not your section." David raised the digital boarding pass on his phone. "Seat 1A. First class. That's what I paid for." A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. A couple of phones tilted upward. Someone whispered, "Here we go," under their breath. Lauren took the phone, looked at it, and frowned as though it were counterfeit cash. "I'll need to see your ID," she said, arms folded. David reached into his wallet. Before he could hand it over, her coworker, Aaron Blake, came down the aisle. "What's happening?" Aaron asked quietly, though half the cabin could hear her. Lauren shook her head. "He's in the wrong seat. Says he booked first class." Phones lifted a little higher. A passenger in 2A muttered, "Buddy, just sit where you belong. Don't make a scene." David didn't react. He placed a small leather briefcase under his seat, buckled his belt, and waited. "Everything is correct," he said evenly. "Maybe check the system again." Lauren tapped furiously at her tablet, frustration flashing across her face. "It shows you bought an economy ticket. Please move." David pulled up an email receipt, paid in full 3 weeks earlier. He held it out. "This is my confirmation. Maybe your system is lagging." Another ripple of murmur spread. Someone 2 rows back whispered, "This doesn't feel right." Lauren didn't look at the receipt. "Sir, I'm asking you one last time," she snapped. "Move to economy." David inhaled slowly, exhaled slower. Then he reached for something in his briefcase, a sleek metal membership card. "Platinum tier. Hundreds of thousands of miles behind it. I've flown with Skyjet every month for 6 years," he said. This card didn't come from a gift shop. Lauren barely glanced at it. "Anyone can buy those online." David blinked once, an almost imperceptible hint of disbelief. "They cannot," he replied softly. Passengers traded glances. A young woman in 3B quietly hit go live on her phone. The tension thickened like fog. Then the cockpit door opened. Captain Andrew Collins, tall, composed, and carrying a presence that filled the aisle, stepped out. His silver hair and crisp uniform gave him an air of unquestioned authority. "What's the delay?" he asked, not even looking at David. Lauren gestured toward the man in 1A, passenger refusing to move to his assigned seat. Andrew finally looked at David, his hoodie, his sneakers, his unassuming appearance. A judgment flashed so fast most people would have missed it. "You're holding up our departure," the captain said. "Move to your correct seat now." David met his gaze. Calm, controlled. "Captain, I am sitting in my assigned seat. I've shown my documents." Andrew didn't even glance at them. "I've flown for over a decade. I know when someone is trying to bend the rules. Cooperate." A beat of silence. David took out his phone and began recording. "For the record," he narrated, "Flight 872, 2:47 p.m. I am being ordered out of my paid first-class seat despite having full documentation." The captain stiffened. "Stop recording. You're disturbing the cabin." David kept the camera steady. "I am documenting misconduct." Lauren grabbed her radio. "Security to gate 12. Passenger refusing to comply." Phones lifted everywhere. A man sighed loudly. "Just go send coach. Not worth the trouble." But then someone spoke up. "Wait." The woman from 3B called out. He showed his ticket. "Why not verify it?" Lauren's cheeks flushed. "Ma'am, please stay out of this." David stayed silent. Every move measured. Every breath calculated. The cabin screens above flashed. Delayed 23 minutes. Security arrived. Officer Miguel Alvarez, with 22 years on the job, and Officer Dana Brooks, younger but sharp and observant. They approached cautiously. "Sir, can we see your documents?" Alvarez asked. David handed everything over: ticket receipt, boarding pass, membership card. Alvarez examined them, brow furrowing. Lauren scoffed. "Those aren't ours. Probably fake." Passengers gasped. Someone whispered, "This is getting ugly." David's phone buzzed. Notification. Emergency board meeting. Room, The woman in 3B caught the alert reflection in the phone's glass. Her eyebrows shot up. "Who gets messages like that?" she murmured. David stood slowly, breath steady. The energy in the cabin shifted, not loud, but undeniable. The moment felt like the inhale before something monumental. Phones everywhere were recording now. Dozens of eyes locked on David Lawson, waiting to see whether he would break or whether something far bigger was unfolding. And though he stood quietly, one thing became obvious to everyone watching. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't confused. He was waiting for the moment the entire room would realize exactly who they were dealing with. And that moment was coming, far sooner than anyone expected. David stood motionless, his expression unreadable as security tightened the circle around him. The atmosphere felt electrified, like the seconds before a storm hits. Every phone pointed his way. Every whisper in the cabin grew sharper. Lauren crossed her arms, emboldened by the captain's presence. "You're continuing to delay this flight," she said. "If you don't move right now, you will be escorted off." Captain Collins added, "You're out of compliance. My crew and I don't have time for games." David didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. Instead, he quietly reached into his briefcase. Passengers leaned in. Some even stood. Even Officer Alvarez paused. David pulled out a slim, black wallet and opened it to reveal a polished business card. Minimalist, elegant, unmistakably expensive. He held it between two fingers. The cabin went still. On the card, etched in silver lettering, David Lawson, Chief Executive Officer, Lawson Dynamics Corporation. For a moment, nobody moved, as if time itself had frozen. Lauren's eyes widened. Her posture faltered. What is this supposed to mean?" she stammered. The woman in 3B covered her mouth. "Oh my God!" Someone behind her whispered loudly. "He's a CO?" Phones zoomed in. Streams lit up with comments. David didn't smirk or soften. He simply met Lauren's gaze. "It means," he said evenly, "that I'm not unfamiliar with your system. Or with your airline." Officer Brooks blinked. "Lawson Dynamics isn't that." Before she could finish, David reached back into his briefcase and placed a thick binder on the tray table in front of him. It made a heavy thud that echoed across the quiet cabin. He flipped it open. Page after page displayed documents, investment reports, shareholder statements, major acquisition records. Every sheet stamped with the same logo. One passenger gasped. Another whispered, "No way." Someone's live chat exploded with messages. "Is this real? Search him up. Holy, this dude is huge." Captain Collins, who had looked so unshakable moments ago, now looked uncertain. Lauren stepped back. "What are all these documents?" David lifted a specific page and handed it to Officer Alvarez. It was a Skyjet Airlines shareholder certificate. The lettering was bold. The meaning was undeniable. Across the top row, Lawson Dynamics Corporation, 22% ownership stake, a fifth of the airline, nearly a quarter of the entire company, a power large enough to force changes, influence executive decisions, and call emergency board meetings. Alvarez swallowed hard. He had seen celebrities, politicians, billionaires, but he had never been handed documentation like this in the middle of an airplane aisle. Captain Collins cleared his throat. Is this legitimate?" "You're welcome to verify it," David replied. "Everything is time-stamped, notarized, and current." The captain's color drained. His uniform suddenly felt too tight. Why didn't you say this earlier?" David raised one eyebrow. "I tried," he said. "You refused to look." This time, several passengers did not hide their reactions. "Exactly. He told you. You just assumed. This is embarrassing." Lauren opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her authority evaporated. She looked like someone trapped in a spotlight she never expected. David continued calmly. For years, I've watched incidents like this unfold. People judged before being acknowledged. People dismissed before their information was even checked. I never planned to be in one of those stories. But here we are. His phone buzzed again. A notification flashed. Emergency board meeting, starting now. The woman in 3B whispered to the man next to her. Board meeting? As in their board. David tapped the phone once, then looked at Officer Alvarez. Before I joined that meeting, he said softly, I'm giving everyone here the opportunity to correct this situation the right way. Every eye was on him. Lauren's voice cracked. Sir, I didn't know. David held up a hand. Calm, controlled, absolute. Protocol requires fairness, he said. Not assumptions. Even Officer Brooks nodded faintly. The screens above flickered again, delayed 41 minutes. Passengers shifted impatiently, but not because of David. Now the cause was obvious, and resentment toward the crew was palpable. Captain Collins clasped his hands behind his back. His voice dropped to something almost conciliatory. What would you like us to do, Mr. Lawson? At that, David closed his briefcase with deliberate calm. First, he said, I'd like my seat respected. Of course, the captain said instantly. Second, David added, I'd like all documentation reviewed so the system error is corrected, and so this doesn't happen to the next person who looks like me. A wave of agreement murmured through the cabin. That's fair. Absolutely. That should have been done from the start. Lauren swallowed. And anything else? David studied her. His voice stayed steady, but now carried weight that filled the entire aircraft. We can discuss the rest, he said, after the board meeting. Passengers reacted audibly. He's going to the board? This is insane. They're in huge trouble. Officer Alvarez handed back the documents, clearing his throat. Mr. Lawson, everything appears valid. There's no reason you shouldn't stay in your seat. Captain Collins exhaled shakily. Agreed. David nodded once, unbothered, as though nothing had rattled him from the start. But then, he looked directly at Lauren, not with anger, not with arrogance, but with something that made her shift uneasily. Accountability. You were quick to assume I didn't belong here, he said quietly. That assumption created this entire situation. Lauren's eyes filled with panic. I didn't mean... Intent matters, David said, but impact matters more. The rehook tightened around the entire cabin. Everyone felt it. Then David sat back down, buckled his seatbelt, and opened his laptop. I'll be on the board call, he said calmly. Please let me know when you're ready to continue boarding. And just like that, the man they tried to remove, the man they misjudged, the man they dismissed as out of place, sat in seat 1A like he owned it. Because, in more ways than one, he did. And the moment he joined that board call, everything the airline thought it could control began to crumble. David connected his laptop to the call, the screen casting a cool glow across his face. The hum of the aircraft quieted as passengers leaned sideways, pretending not to watch. Even the security officers stood nearby, unsure whether to stay or retreat. A digital chime sounded. The Skyjet board appeared one by one on the screen. Executives in suits, legal advisors, senior directors, analysts, and at the center of it all, Chairwoman Olivia Grant, a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and a reputation for ironclad leadership. David, she said, voice steady but strained. We saw the live stream. Is everything all right? Passengers gasped softly. They realized the board already knew. David didn't turn away from the camera. You've all seen enough to know the answer. Olivia inhaled sharply. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. We understand there was an issue with your seat, she began. David cut in, polite but firm. This is not about a seat. Phones around the cabin recorded every word. Even Lauren and Captain Collins stood frozen behind him, knowing their next breaths depended on what happened now. A legal officer on the call cleared his throat. Mr. Lawson, before we proceed, could you confirm the situation from your perspective? David tapped a key. I'll summarize it for the documentation. He spoke calmly, without raising his voice. I was challenged, dismissed, accused of fraud, and threatened with removal from my assigned seat. Not because of system data, not because of airline policy, but because of assumptions. A ripple of discomfort spread across the faces on screen. He continued, I presented proof of purchase. It wasn't reviewed. I provided membership documentation. It wasn't reviewed. What was reviewed was me. Whispers rose among passengers. Someone muttered, he's right. Olivia sat straighter. David, on behalf of Skyjet, I apologize for what you experienced. We take this very seriously. Words are a start, David replied. But systems, not apologies, prevent repetition. A man on the board leaned in, adjusting his glasses. Mr. Lawson, what do you propose we do? David lifted the binder again and placed a second document on top. We fix this correctly, immediately, and publicly. The board fell silent. Olivia nodded for him to continue. David switched screens, showing a breakdown of customer complaints, bias-related incidents, and system flaws. Over 42 million passengers flew with this airline last year, he said. Your dissatisfaction index is 18% higher than the industry average. Incidents involving unfair treatment, especially toward minority travelers, have increased by 39%. Passengers stared at him, stunned. He had the numbers, the context, and the cold precision to back every claim. This incident isn't isolated, he said. It's symptomatic. A silence hung so thick the passengers could almost feel it pressing against the walls. One board member rubbed his forehead. David, what demands are you making today? David folded his hands. For this airline to function with integrity, immediate changes must be implemented. Not proposals, not promises. Execution. He began listing them with composed authority. 1. Staff involved in discriminatory behavior must be reassigned or dismissed. Lauren's breath caught. Collins closed his eyes. 2. Every customer-facing employee must complete comprehensive bias awareness training within 30 days. Several passengers nodded instinctively. 3. A third-party, anonymous reporting channel must be created for passengers and employees. Not internal, independent. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. 4. David continued. A dedicated fund must be allocated to develop diversity and fairness standards across the airline. A real investment, not a press release. A few murmurs rose from the cabin. And 5, he added, locking eyes with the camera, the airline must issue a public statement acknowledging systemic shortcomings and committing to reform. No passive language. No excuses. Olivia lifted a hand to her mouth. She wasn't shocked by the demands. She was shocked by how flawlessly he delivered them. David, these are significant requests, she said carefully. He leaned forward. So, is the damage done today? Passengers whispered again. Phones kept recording. This wasn't just a conversation. This was a public reckoning. A younger director on the call raised a timid question. If these measures are not implemented, what action will you take? David didn't hesitate. Lawson Dynamics will reconsider all capital allocations to Skyjet. Olivia froze. That includes, David continued, withdrawing our 22% ownership stake and advising our partner companies to cease collaboration. The cabin erupted in gasps. A man in row 4 whispered he could tank the whole airline. Another replied, he's not bluffing. Olivia's voice trembled. David, this would devastate our market position. Then correct the system, he said. The board members whispered among themselves urgently. Several legal advisors typed notes rapidly. A senior director finally spoke. We accept your conditions, he said. All of them. Olivia exhaled, shoulders dropping. Yes, full compliance. Effective immediately. David nodded once. Firm, controlled, definitive. Thank you, he said. Now let's make sure this moment becomes a turning point for the industry, not another forgotten headline. The call ended. David lowered his laptop screen. Passengers erupted into a wave of surprise, awe, disbelief, and admiration all at once. Someone whispered, he just changed the whole airline right from seat 1A. Another said, this is history. Officer Alvarez stepped forward, voice steady with newfound respect. Mr. Lawson, everything you've asked for will be carried out. Immediately. David nodded. Good. Let's continue boarding. Everyone watched him. Lauren, the captain, the officers, the passengers, because the air around him felt different now. He didn't look like a man who had just been humiliated. He looked like a man who had just reshaped an entire system. And the next wave of consequences was only beginning. Because once those orders went into motion, the airport would never operate the same way again. The moment the board call ended, the energy in the airport shifted. It wasn't loud or dramatic at first, more like a silent current moving through everyone who had witnessed what happened. Passengers stared. Crew members whispered in tight clusters. Phones continued recording because no one wanted to miss what would unfold next. Janet Porter, the airport operations supervisor, hurried toward the gate with a stack of printed forms in her hands. Her steps were quick, urgent, and slightly unsteady. She had only learned a few minutes ago that the man sitting calmly in 1A wasn't just a passenger, but one of the airline's largest shareholders. And now she was expected to execute what the board had just agreed to, right here in real time, in front of hundreds of watching eyes. David sat still, hands resting on his laptop, expression composed. He looked like someone who had already calculated the next 10 moves in advance. Janet stopped in front of him, catching her breath. "Mr. Lawson," she said, voice respectful and firm, "I've received immediate directives from corporate. Changes are now being implemented." David nodded, but didn't interrupt. Janet continued, "We're removing the staff involved in the incident from duty for reassignment and review. A temporary team will take over this flight. We're also pulling system logs, updating passenger status records, and documenting all procedures for compliance." Passengers murmured. Lauren stepped back, her hands clasped tightly. Captain Collins stared at the floor, jaw tense. David pressed his fingertips together. "Transparency," he said quietly. "Every step forward must be transparent." Janet nodded. "We understand." Security stepped forward to escort Lauren and Captain Collins away from the gate area. Not aggressively, but formally. The crowd watched with wide eyes. Some recorded it. Some whispered things like, "That's what accountability looks like," and "She didn't expect this when she woke up this morning." Lauren kept her gaze lowered, shaken by how quickly authority can vanish when truth arrives. Once they were gone, Janet signaled to a waiting group of backup cabin crew who had been on standby. They approached with a mixture of professionalism and nerves, fully aware of the significance of the moment. As they prepared to step on board, David opened his briefcase again, pulling out another set of documents, this time printed guidelines, timelines, charts, and compliance drafts. He handed them to Janet. These outline the structural changes for staff training and reporting channels. Begin today. Notify all departments. This work cannot wait. Passengers exchanged stunned looks. One whispered, "He's running the place from seat 1A. Another said, "Honestly, he's doing more to fix the airline than they have in years." Janet flipped through the pages, astonished by the level of detail. "We'll follow every instruction," she said. "Implementation begins now." David nodded once in quiet approval. The temporary staff went on board, adjusting cabin settings, checking safety equipment, reviewing passenger protocols. Everything moved with an urgency that came not from fear, but from the weight of being watched by an entire terminal, and by one man whose expectations could not be ignored. Officer Alvarez stepped beside David. "Mr. Lawson, is there anything else you need before boarding continues?" David glanced around. "I need assurance that every passenger on this flight is treated fairly from this point forward. Zero exceptions." "You have my word," Alvarez said. David turned his attention back to the gate area. People looked at him not the way they had earlier, with suspicion or hesitation, but with respect, admiration, and in some cases gratitude. He stood up, stretched his back, and walked a few steps down the aisle toward the entrance of the aircraft. The atmosphere around him shifted as he moved, like ripples following a stone dropped into still water. He paused for a moment. Passengers held their breath. "I want everyone here to understand something," he said, voice steady but carrying the room. "What happened today wasn't about a seat. It was about the system behind the seat. Systems can fail, but they can also be rebuilt." A woman near the gate nodded, eyes bright. Someone behind her said softly, "He's right." David continued, This kind of incident shouldn't need a shareholder to fix it. No passenger, no human being should have to prove their worth just to be treated with respect. Phones lifted higher. Change isn't about apologies or statements, he said. It's about design, accountability, and action. And today, action begins. A wave of applause rose, not loud but genuine. It grew as more passengers joined in. Janet swallowed hard, moved by the sincerity in the room. David returned to his seat, placed his briefcase neatly beneath him, and reopened his laptop. Boarding resumed, but differently this time. Passengers walked past him with small nods, expressions of gratitude, admiration, or simple acknowledgement. A man paused by his row. "Thank you," he whispered, "for standing up. Not just for you, but for everyone." David gave him a small nod. Everyone deserves fairness. Even the new flight attendants seemed to carry themselves differently, as if reminded of the meaning behind their roles. They greeted each passenger with genuine respect, not practiced formality. The gate finally closed. The cabin lights dimmed. But before takeoff, Janet reappeared, leaning quietly toward David. "One more thing," she said softly. "Your message, it's spreading. Other airports are calling. The CEO is gathering regional leadership as we speak." David looked up at her. "That's how change begins," he replied. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, the mood inside wasn't just calmer, it felt transformed. Passengers no longer saw an airline in crisis. They saw an airline at a crossroads. And they had witnessed the moment the turning point began. Because the real impact wasn't happening on the plane, it was already rippling through offices, systems, and entire departments across the country, just by one man refusing to be moved. Word spread faster than the aircraft could taxi. By the time Flight 872 reached cruising altitude, the story had already traveled through terminals, break rooms, corporate Slack channels, and social media feeds nationwide. Clips of David's calm responses, the dismissed crew walking away, and the moment he revealed his share certificate were replayed thousands of times within the hour. Inside the cabin, the tone felt different, not tense, not chaotic, but charged with awareness. Passengers murmured quietly. Some avoided eye contact with David out of respect, while others kept glancing, still trying to understand how a man who looked so ordinary had just shifted an entire corporation. The temporary flight crew worked with precision that bordered on reverence. Not out of fear, but out of the knowledge that their every move was both recorded and held against a higher standard. The lead attendant, Dana Reeves, a woman with an air of steadiness and grace, approached David with a respectful nod. "Mr. Lawson, may I bring you anything? Water? Tea?" she asked. "Water is fine," he replied. She brought it promptly, set it down gently, and added in a lowered voice, "We're honored to have you on this flight. And thank you. What you did out there, it mattered." David inclined his head slightly, just doing what needed to be done. Dana smiled, then moved on. Across the aisle, the woman from 3B leaned forward. "I still can't believe it," she whispered to her seatmate. "He handled everything so calmly. No jilling, no threats, just facts." Her seatmate nodded. That's real power. Passengers weren't wrong. Power didn't always scream. Sometimes it whispered, quietly altering everything in its path. David opened his laptop again, but he wasn't drafting emails or sending orders. Instead, he was reviewing real-time updates being shared from Skyjet's internal teams. Compliance officers, regional supervisors, labor attorneys. They were all already responding to what corporate had labeled a critical systemic breach. Messages flashed in rapid succession. Training modules deploying in next 48 hours. Legal reviewing dismissal procedures. Tech team now configuring external reporting portal. He scrolled with a controlled, measured expression. Not pleased. Not angry. Focused. A few rows behind him, a teenager whispered to his mother, "Mom, that guy changed the whole airline in one afternoon." His mother nodded, still stunned. Some people spend years trying to do that. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as attendants prepared for meal service. Before they could reach David's row again, Officer Alvarez stepped quietly into the first-class cabin. He had insisted on remaining aboard to ensure no further disruptions. "Mr. Lawson," he said in a low voice, leaning closer. "I've been briefed by regional security. They're reviewing all staff handling procedures starting tonight. It's a full sweep. They're not holding back." "They shouldn't," David replied. Alvarez nodded. "They also want you to know corporate is drafting the public statement already." David gave a faint, almost unseen nod. He wasn't looking for gratitude. He was tracking accountability. Alvarez hesitated. "Sir, I've worked security for over 20 years. I've seen a lot. But the way you handled today, I've never witnessed someone take control of a system this large, this quickly, this precisely." David closed his laptop gently. When systems fail, people suffer. When systems improve, people thrive. He paused, meeting Alvarez's eyes. "My job is to make sure the second happens more often than the first." Alvarez stood there a moment longer, then offered his hand. David shook it with quiet firmness. As meal service continued, people began discussing their own experiences, little moments of bias or frustration they had brushed aside because they hadn't known how to respond. Someone in row 5 said, "I've been flying for years. I always thought if something unjust happened, there was nothing I could do. Guess I was wrong." Someone else replied, "He gave everyone a blueprint." David heard these conversations, though he didn't react. His focus was already moving ahead. Halfway through the flight, Dana Reeves returned, holding a small tablet. "Mr. Lawson," she said softly, "corporate asked if you'd like to speak with the CEO again after landing. They said they want your involvement in the rollout of reforms." David took a small breath. "We'll see," he replied. "Implementation matters more than meetings." Dana nodded. "Of course." Minutes later, a notification pinged on his laptop, this one from his executive assistant. Media already reporting initial details. Requests piling up. Recommend statement. David's jaw tightened slightly, not from annoyance, but from understanding the responsibility ahead. Whatever he said now would set the tone for public reaction. He typed, "No interviews. No statements. Not yet. This story is not about me. It's about the system that must change." He hit send. The engines hummed deeply as the aircraft continued eastward. And as it did, something remarkable happened in the rows behind him. People began helping one another, making space, offering headphones, asking if others needed anything. Not a performance, an awakening, a subtle recognition that small acts carried weight. A man in row 4 leaned forward to the woman ahead of him. "If he can do all that in one afternoon," he said, "maybe we can start doing small things right." She smiled softly. "That's how it begins." And yet, beneath the calm, David's mind was already ahead, thinking of structure, reforms, rollout strategies. Not because he wanted attention, but because he understood something most people didn't. Systemic problems don't vanish because one person stands up. They vanish because enough people learn how to stand. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, a brief shake that rustled napkins and slid a few cups. Some passengers stiffened. But David? He barely blinked. He'd weathered far worse shakes today. As the flight steadied, he closed his laptop and looked out the window at the evening sky. The horizon glowed gold and violet, streaked across the clouds like a reminder that clarity often followed chaos. He exhaled slowly. The world below was already changing. Rehook, because when the wheels touched the runway, the true ripple effect across airports, corporate offices, government agencies, and entire industries would only grow louder. All because one man refused to be moved. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt, and the cabin erupted into a mix of relief and anticipation. But unlike a normal landing, where people hurried for overhead bins and exit lines, no one stood. No one rushed. Everyone watched the man in 1A, as if the story wasn't ending, but only shifting chapters. David unbuckled his seat belt slowly. The moment he stood, the first-class cabin straightened instinctively, unsure if they were witnessing a passenger preparing to leave or a leader stepping into the next phase of crisis. Dana Reeves approached with a composed smile. "Mr. Lawson, corporate requested that you deplane first. They've arranged for a private meeting room near the terminal entrance." David shook his head. "I'm not stepping off this aircraft before everyone else. There's no hierarchy in fairness. Dana nadid respectfully. Understood. Officer Alvarez appeared next to her. Security's been notified. We'll maintain oversight until you exit the airport. David lifted his briefcase calmly. Oversight isn't necessary. Accountability is. Passengers watched him, some with admiration, some with awe, some simply stunned by the human capacity to remain so centered under pressure. The door opened. The jet bridge hummed. A group of Skyjet regional directors waited just outside. Nervous, stiff, out of place among rolling suitcases and stroller-wielding parents. The first passenger to exit paused next to David. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You didn't just help yourself. You helped all of us." David nodded once. Everyone deserves that. More passengers followed, offering small gestures, nods, whispers, brief smiles. One man simply put his hand over his heart before stepping off. When the aisle cleared, David finally exited. The directors straightened their posture like soldiers bracing for an inspection. The lead director, Philip Harris, stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson," he said, "we're here to escort you to the conference area. Corporate is awaiting your direction." David didn't move immediately. He surveyed them, men and women who operated a massive airline system, but now looked uncertain, almost humbled. "Direction," he said slowly, "is useless without understanding." Philip swallowed. "Of course, we're ready to listen." David motioned toward the terminal. "Then let's walk." They escorted him through a section of the airport, now cordoned off by security, not to protect him, but to control press and incoming crowds. Word had traveled fast. Reporters had gathered at glass barriers like spectators viewing a rare and powerful event. Camera flashes exploded. Microphones extended. Voices shouted questions. "Mr. Lawson, do you plan legal action? Is Skyjet facing penalties? What changes will you demand next? Do you believe this exposes industry-wide discrimination?" David didn't slow down. "Not today," he said simply, refusing interviews as he had on the flight. "This moment is bigger than statements." Inside the meeting room, screens already displayed system logs, personnel files, procedural failures, and real-time updates from employees around the country. Olivia Grant appeared on a large monitor, tension visible in her face. "David," she said, "thank you for agreeing to meet again so soon." He sat, not slumped, not rigid, but centered. "We're not here for ceremony," he replied. "We're here for reform." Olivia nodded. "We've suspended both employees involved. Training protocols are launching tonight. The reporting system goes live in 48 hours. But we need guidance on how deep this audit should go." "All the way down," David said. "Surface fixes won't stop systemic cracks." Philip hesitated. "Do you believe the problem is that widespread?" David opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. "Your numbers already answer that." Charts, graphs, and feedback summaries filled the pages, every one showing a similar trend. Patterns, recurring behaviors, delayed resolutions, ignored complaints. "What happened to me?" David said, voice quiet but heavy with truth, "happens to thousands who don't have cameras, documents, or leverage." The room fell into a silence that felt heavier than any turbulence. Olivia finally spoke. "We underestimated the scale and the urgency." "No, David corrected gently. You underestimated the people affected." She nodded slowly. "You're right." He leaned forward. "This isn't a one-day fix. It's a structural rebuild. Human bias doesn't vanish with a memo. It changes with systems that don't allow it room to breathe." One director asked, "So how do we ensure it doesn't breathe?" David tapped the folder again. "With real-time oversight, independent auditing, automated alerts when staff repeatedly mishandle passengers, transparent reporting, passenger empowerment." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "And most importantly, leadership accountability. Because if leadership doesn't change, nothing will." Olivia absorbed the statement like a blow she had expected but wasn't prepared to face. She exhaled. "Then we begin today." David nodded. "Good. Because what happened wasn't a PR incident. It was a mirror, and it showed more than you thought." A subtle shiver passed through the room. They weren't just fixing a mistake anymore. They were confronting an entire culture. Moments later, Janet entered the room with updated forms, timelines, and revised protocols. She set them in front of David gently. "Everything you requested is being implemented," she said. "And I want to thank you. This could change everything for so many people." David looked up. "That's the point." She nodded, visibly moved. Outside, reporters continued shouting questions through the glass. Travelers paused to watch screens showing live updates about the reforms. Employees across the nation received new training notifications. Corporate offices scrambled like a hive, reorganizing itself. A single confrontation had escalated into a nationwide restructuring, and David wasn't even finished yet. He stood, lifting his briefcase. "Where are you going?" Philip asked. "To make sure this doesn't fizzle out when the headlines do," David said. The directors exchanged uneasy glances. They knew this wasn't a man who made threats or demands. This was a man who made systems change. Rehook. Because once David left that room, Skyjet wasn't the only organization preparing to rewrite its policies. An entire industry was watching, suddenly aware that their next mistake might meet a man who refused to be moved. David stepped out of the conference room, and it was immediately clear that the airport had transformed into something far different from what it had been a few hours earlier. Screens in the terminal flashed headlines. Security personnel redirected foot traffic, and groups of employees gathered in tight circles reading urgent memos sent from headquarters. His presence didn't cause a scene, yet the awareness of who he was rippled through the crowd like a low current. He walked with a steady pace, not rushed, not dramatic. The directors followed behind him until he stopped and turned. "This part," he said calmly, "I handle alone." They froze mid-step, unsure but obedient. Slowly, they stepped back, watching him navigate through a terminal full of shifting conversations. A flight attendant passing by nudged her coworker. "That's him," she whispered. "The guy who made corporate move in 1 hour." Her coworker replied, "Good. Somebody needed to." David heard none of this. His mind was already processing what needed to happen next. The incident was no longer contained to one gate, one staff team, or even one airline. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from advocacy groups, legal advisors, transportation boards, Fortune 500 CEOs, and even government officials asking for statements, meetings, or guidance. He ignored all of them. He had one goal now: create a framework that didn't rely on his involvement ever again. As he walked, Officer Alvarez caught up beside him. "Mr. Lawson," he said gently, "you left the meeting pretty quickly. Everything all right?" "I've done what needed to be done in that room," David replied. "The next phase happens out here." Alvarez nodded, though he didn't fully understand. David stopped at a window overlooking the runway. He watched as another Skyjet plane lifted into the air. He thought about the thousands of passengers on flights every hour, unseen, unheard, relying on systems they had no control over. "People trust airlines with their lives," he said quietly. "But the industry has treated trust as optional." Alvarez folded his arms. "I've worked these halls for more than 2 decades. You're right. People report things. They get ignored, or lost, or mishandled. You're fixing what we all got used to." David didn't answer right away. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a USB drive. A simple one, black, unmarked. "This contains the reporting framework I designed for corporate training divisions last year. I wasn't sure if they were ready for it then." He handed it to Alvarez. "They are now." Alvarez stared at it, surprised. "Why give this to me?" "Because you'll walk it to the right department. It won't get buried coming from you." Alvarez accepted it carefully. "I won't let you down." David nodded once. "I know." He resumed walking until he reached one of the busiest intersections in the terminal, crowded with travelers and staff passing in every direction. Some recognized him and slowed. Others whispered. A few stared openly. That was when a young woman in a business suit approached him cautiously. "Mr. Lawson?" He stopped. "Yes. My name is Emily Hart. I work for Skyjet's customer relations department." She hesitated. "I've read hundreds of discrimination reports. Thousands, honestly, and we're told to log them, but not escalate unless they're repeated offenses." David's eyes lifted slightly. That's how systems bury harm. She nodded. I wanted to say something for years. Seeing what you did, it gave me the courage to step up. I'm ready to help fix this. David studied her, steady gaze, clear voice, no fear. What's your position exactly? He asked. Mid-level supervisor. No real authority, she said. He shook his head. Authority isn't a title. It's a decision. If you want to help, you'll help. Her eyes warmed with relief. Thank you. Really? He leaned closer. Then your first step is simple. Don't let this momentum fade. You've seen the reports. You know the patterns. Speak truth in the rooms where people whisper lies. She nodded firmly. I will. David watched her walk away. A single determined employee could do more than a dozen policies ever could. His phone buzzed again. This time he checked it. A message from his executive assistant. CNN, BBC, NYT, Wall Street Journal all requesting interviews ASAP. Want to respond? He typed back. No interviews until systems are active. Nothing public until the reforms exist. He slipped the phone away. Suddenly, another person approached. Older, tired-eyed, wearing a mechanic's uniform. Mr. Lawson? I'm Mike. I work in ground operations. Been here 19 years. David offered a quiet nod. How can I help you, Mike? The man's voice quivered slightly, not with fear, but with gratitude. You didn't just speak for yourself today. You spoke for all of us who get talked down to or ignored because we're not wearing suits. David placed a hand on his shoulder. Everyone deserves respect. Uniforms don't determine worth. Mike swallowed hard. Thank you. David let his hand drop. Take pride in your work, Mike. You keep playing safe. That's more value than most people ever give credit for. Mike nodded and stepped away, wiping his eyes discreetly. A moment later, the overhead PA system began playing announcements. People resumed moving. The atmosphere felt softer, like the airport itself had inhaled after holding its breath too long. But David wasn't done. Inside his briefcase, another set of documents waited. Drafts for industry-wide oversight proposals he had written long before today, anticipating a moment when change would be possible. And that moment had finally arrived. He approached a seating area where a group of employees huddled around a tablet, reading updates from headquarters. One woman looked up. Mr. Lawson, are we really shifting everything? David nodded. If you hold your part of the system together, yes. True change doesn't come from the top. It comes from consistency on the ground. That's what we want, she said. We're tired of pretending everything's fine. It's not fine. It will be, David said. Not today, but soon. She smiled softly. Thanks to you. David didn't smile back. He wasn't here for praise. But he did give a quiet, approving nod. As he walked toward the terminal exit, the automatic doors slid open. Cool air rushed in. Outside, reporters lined up behind barricades, their cameras ready, microphones in hand. Security held them back. David paused. This was the moment everyone expected him to step forward and deliver a statement that would dominate headlines. Instead, he turned away from the microphones completely. He walked down a side corridor that led to the parking area, silent, calm, unbothered by the spectacle behind him. The world wanted a soundbite. He wanted a system. And systems, unlike stories, didn't need applause to function. Rehook, because by the time David reached the parking structure, 3 major airlines had already called emergency meetings of their own, and the ripple effect he started was about to shake an entire industry to its core. By the time David entered the parking structure, the world outside had already begun to shift. His phone vibrated constantly, not with meaningless noise, but with the unmistakable tremors of an industry reacting in real time. 3 major airlines had issued internal bulletins. 2 government transportation agencies circulated urgent review memos. A coalition of frequent flyers had begun trending a hashtag demanding national reform. And David had spoken no public words at all. That silence carried more weight than any press conference ever could. He walked toward his car, an understated black sedan. Not flashy, not armored, not escorted. The simplicity of it contrasted sharply with the upheaval he had set into motion. As he reached the driver's side door, a voice called from behind him. Mr. Lawson. He turned. A young man in his mid-20s jogged up, wearing a faded airline employee badge. He was out of breath, palms sweaty, trying to gather his composure. "Sir, sorry, I didn't mean to run up on you like that," he said. "My name's Victor, customer service rep. Been here 6 months." David nodded calmly. "How can I help you, Victor?" The young man swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say what you did today. It mattered. More than you know." He hesitated. "People like me, we get yelled at, ignored, blamed for system stuff we don't control. And when we try to speak up, no one listens." David's expression softened just a little. "I understand." Victor rubbed the back of his neck. "Seeing someone like you, someone with actual influence, use it to force change instead of just protecting himself, that meant something." "It's not about influence," David said. "It's about responsibility." Victor nodded slowly, absorbing every word. "I just wanted to thank you. That's all." David offered a quiet nod. "Then do something for me in return." Victor blinked. "Anything. When your coworkers speak up about something broken, listen. Be the kind of person who doesn't need a shareholder in the room to do what's right." Victor breathed in deeply. "I will, sir." David stepped back. "Good. That's how systems change from the inside out." Victor wiped his eyes discreetly and hurried back toward the terminal with a renewed sense of purpose. David unlocked his car, but before he opened the door, his phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made him pause. "Department of Transportation requesting immediate consultation. Will you take the call?" He stood still for a long moment. Then he typed, "Not yet. Implementations first." He slid the phone into his pocket. As he opened the car door, he heard footsteps approaching, slower, heavier, deliberate. He turned to see a woman in her late 40s wearing a dark blazer with an FAA security badge clipped to the pocket. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "I'm Agent Rachel Vernon. I oversee regulatory compliance reviews for airline operations." David waited. "I watched the footage," she continued. "All of it. And it exposed a level of systemic negligence we can't ignore." Passengers in the distance paused, eavesdropping without shame. Rachel continued, "We're launching an immediate investigation, not just in a Skyjet, but across all major carriers. Whatever frameworks you recommended in that meeting, our office needs them. We need your expertise." David closed the car door gently. "What you need first," he said, "is to hold your own audit teams accountable. Ineffective oversight breeds failure, not frontline staff." Rachel nodded slowly. "I know. That's why I came in person." David raised an eyebrow. "Most people in your position would have sent an email." She cracked a faint smile. "Most people in my position didn't just watch a shareholder correct an entire airline in 2 hours." There was a brief silence. "I'm ready to assist," David finally said, "but only under one condition." Rachel straightened. "Name it." "No shortcuts," he said. "No quiet settlements. No PR shielding. If you want real reform, you must expose every flaw, not tuck them into footnotes." Rachel exhaled. "Understood," and agreed. David nodded. "Then we'll speak tomorrow." Rachel stepped back. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. You may have changed the industry today." He didn't respond, because he hadn't done it for thanks. As she walked away, David finally got into his car. He rested his hands on the steering wheel for a moment, letting the quiet settle around him. His mind wasn't on praise, or attention, or headlines. It was on the long, tedious, unglamorous work ahead. The work no cameras would broadcast. The work that actually transformed systems. He started the engine. Before he could pull out, his phone buzzed yet again. This time a voice message from someone he hadn't expected. Angela Thompson, the young MBA student who had once been ignored after experiencing discrimination on a different airline. He played the message. "Mr. Lawson, I just wanted to say thank you. Your actions today gave the rest of us hope. Real hope that the system can change. I'm starting my own documentation initiative tonight. People need a place to be heard, and you showed us it's possible. I don't want anything from you. Just thank you for showing courage on a day when the rest of us stayed silent." David listened quietly. When the message ended, he stared straight ahead, reflecting. Most people never saw the ripple effect of their actions. But today he was watching it unfold in real time, raw, unfiltered, growing. He shifted the car into drive. But as he exited the parking structure, he noticed something unexpected. Employees and passengers lining the walkway, not cheering, not clapping, but standing with respectful silence. Not worship, not fandom. Recognition. Recognition that one person refusing to be moved had moved everyone else. He drove forward slowly, humbled not by power, but by the responsibility that came with it. Because within 48 hours, those ripples would collide into a wave big enough to reshape not just airlines, but hospitals, schools, transit systems, and every institution where voice and dignity had been ignored. 2 days later, the story had outgrown the airport, the airline, and even the industry. It had become a national conversation, a mirror held up to every institution where bias, dismissal, and silence had long been normalized. David watched the momentum unfold from his office, a clean and minimalist space overlooking the Chicago skyline. Not a single award hung on the walls. No plaques, no framed headlines, no reminders of his own accomplishments. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered were the monitors in front of him, each displaying real-time updates on reforms, audits, complaint submissions, and training rollouts across multiple sectors. Skyjet had finished phase 1 of restructuring. 2 competing airlines had begun copying the new protocols. The Department of Transportation had issued a formal notice of review. 3 senators publicly demanded nationwide standards for fairness in travel. The ripple had become a wave. David sat quietly, reading through a detailed progress report from Skyjet's new oversight team. It included time logs, training attendance, completed audits, and incident resolutions. Numbers he had insisted on seeing, not summaries. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Come in," he said without looking up. Rachel Vernon stepped inside, the FAA badge now accompanied by a stack of printed documents. She closed the door behind her and took a steady breath before speaking. "Mr. Lawson," she said, "we completed the first round of investigative reviews. What we found confirms everything you said." David closed the report and finally met her eyes. "How deep does it go?" "Deep," she replied. "Across multiple airlines. Inconsistent training. Bias complaint filtering. Inaccurate audits. Patterns of neglect buried in procedural language." David nodded once. "Then the work continues." Rachel placed the documents on his desk. "I want you to see this." She opened a file, revealing charts and summaries from dozens of airports. He scanned them silently. Rachel added, "Your intervention didn't just expose one incident. It revealed a systemic failure across the entire sector." David rested his elbows on the desk. "Not a failure. A foundation that requires rebuilding." Rachel hesitated. "The FAA is forming a committee, a permanent one, focused on fair passenger treatment and accountability frameworks. We want you to chair it." He leaned back slightly. "I'm not seeking a political seat," he said. "This isn't political," Rachel replied. "It's structural." David didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached for another report, this one containing hundreds of letters and emails sent to him since the incident. Stories from passengers, employees, supervisors, and even former executives who had been ignored, punished, or silenced for speaking up. He flipped through them slowly. Rachel waited. Finally, he closed the folder. "If I accept," he said, "it will be under certain conditions." "Name them," Rachel said without blinking. "1," David began, "this committee cannot become symbolic. It needs authority, real authority, with the power to audit, enforce, and penalize." "Agreed." 2, the reporting system must be universal, not optional, and accessible to every passenger, no matter the airline. "We can make that mandatory." 3, he continued, transparency. All findings must be public. No hidden reports, no classified memos. Rachel nodded firmly. "Done." And 4, David said, voice steady, "this cannot become another system that protects corporations before people. If I chair it, it will protect passengers first." Rachel smiled, small but genuine. "That's exactly why we asked you." David considered her words. "Then yes, I'll take the position." Rachel exhaled a breath she'd been holding for days. "Thank you. This is going to change everything." David didn't smile. "No, the work we do will." Rachel left the office, But before the door closed, she added, "The nation is watching. And honestly, it's about time we had someone who isn't afraid to be watched." The door clicked shut. David turned back to the screens. More updates were rolling in. Hospital networks inquiring about bias protocols, public school districts requesting oversight models, city transit authorities adopting anonymous reporting systems. Even corporate HR departments were reaching out. Everyone wanted change. Everyone needed a framework. And David had become the reluctant architect of that movement. His phone buzzed. A voice message. He played it. "Mr. Lawson, this is Angela again. I just wanted to say, your actions are inspiring a lot of us. I've received more stories than I can keep up with. People are writing because they believe, for the first time, that someone might actually listen. I don't know where this leads, but thank you for starting it." When a message ended, David sat still for a moment, absorbing the weight of her words. Another notification appeared. Live footage of a transportation summit preparing to broadcast. A speaker stepped onto the stage, addressing thousands. She said, "The conversation we're having today began with a man who refused to be moved from his seat. But what he actually refused to move from was his principal, dignity." The room erupted in applause. David closed his laptop gently. He walked toward the window, looking out at the city. Cars flowed like arteries across bridges, planes carved lines through the sky, trains rumbled beneath the streets. All systems, all interconnected, all reliant on the people who used them. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "It's only the beginning." His reflection stared back at him. Not a hero, not a symbol, just a man who had decided to act at the exact moment when it mattered most. And sometimes, that's enough to move the world. Because in the months to come, David Lawson wouldn't just reshape transportation. He would rewrite how entire industries addressed fairness. And he would prove that one voice, backed by truth and resolve, could become the foundation for national change. 3 months passed, and the country looked different. Not physically. Cities still hummed, airports still buzzed, trains still roared down steel tracks. But something deeper had shifted. The public had become more alert. Employees spoke with more confidence. Passengers documented more openly. Institutions no longer enjoyed the comfort of unchecked authority. And at the center of that shift, quietly, steadily, was David Lawson. He never gave a dramatic speech. He never sat for primetime interviews. He never posted a single triumphant message online. He simply worked. On a rainy Thursday morning, he sat in a conference room in Washington, reviewing the latest nationwide reform report. The newly formed Fair Passenger Treatment Committee, now fully operational under his leadership, had collected data from every major airline, light rail system, rideshare platform, and several intercity bus companies. The results were astonishing. Complaint transparency had increased by 63%. Unresolved cases had dropped by nearly half. Bias-related incidents were down across all sectors. 5 major companies had adopted the anonymous reporting system voluntarily, even before regulation required it. David marked several points on the report, highlighting gaps, annotating weak areas, circling troubling inconsistencies. His work wasn't done. It might never be. A soft knock broke his concentration. "Come in," he said. Angela Thompson entered, more confident now, carrying a binder of her own. The once intimidated MBA student had become a well-spoken advocate, now managing a national database of passenger experiences. She greeted him with a respectful nod. "Morning, Mr. Lawson." "Morning, Angela. What do you have for me?" She handed him the binder. The latest trends report from all submissions to the public portal. "But there's something else." David raised an eyebrow. Angela continued. "We ran an analysis comparing the last 3 months to the 3 months before the Flight 872 incident." David opened the binder. As his eyes moved down the page, he paused. Underlined in blue, the headline read, "Industry-wide bias reduction since implementation. 72% improvement." Angela added softly, "That's the most significant improvement on record for any national transportation system." David nodded, absorbing the magnitude. Angela hesitated. "I know you're focused on what still needs work, but I thought you should see how far things have come. David closed the binder gently. Progress isn't measured by perfection, he said. It's measured by direction. She smiled. And the country is moving in the right one. Before he could respond, his assistant appeared in the doorway. Mr. Lawson, the Senate committee is ready for you. Angela stepped aside as David rose. He walked down a long, quiet hallway lined with portraits of former officials. Not one of them had imagined the kind of hearing he was about to attend. A hearing not about scandal or budget approval, but about fairness as a standard for public service. When he entered the chamber, conversations hushed. Senators, advisors, and reporters all turned toward him. Cameras adjusted. Chairs shifted. Even the chief of staff at the far end straightened reflexively. David didn't look nervous. He didn't look proud. He looked prepared. The chairwoman leaned forward. Mr. Lawson, thank you for being here today. We'd like to discuss national adoption of your accountability framework, not just within transportation, but across federal agencies. David took a seat. I'm ready. A senator adjusted his glasses. Your work has created what many are calling the Lawson model. How do you feel about that? David shook his head politely. It's not my model. It's the people's experience turned into structure. A murmur of approval spread through the room. Another senator asked, do you believe universal reporting and transparency systems could reduce discrimination in sectors beyond transportation? Yes, David answered without hesitation. Because bias isn't confined to one industry. Accountability shouldn't be either. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras zoomed in. But David didn't perform for them. He spoke plainly, offering clear steps, documented failures, measurable solutions, and sustainable frameworks. He approached the hearing the same way he approached everything, methodically, with an unwavering focus on fairness and dignity. 2 hours later, the chairwoman said, Mr. Lawson, you've given this committee more than insight. You've given us direction. We intend to move forward with national standards based on your recommendations. David nodded once. Then let's get to work. When the hearing adjourned, reporters swarmed, but he made no statements. He walked out the back exit, silent as always. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement slick with reflections of the Capitol lights. David paused, adjusting his coat collar, when a familiar voice called from behind. It was Rachel Vernon. You handled that well, she said. I handled what needed handling, David replied. Rachel smiled. You know, you've become something of a symbol. David shook his head. Symbols fade. Systems last. That's exactly why people trust you, she said quietly. You don't chase power. You build structures that limit it. David turned, ready to leave, but Rachel added one more thing. That day on Flight 872, you didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for a nation that didn't know it needed your voice. He looked at her for a moment, then said something almost no one ever heard from him. It wasn't courage, he said softly. It was necessity. Rachel nodded. And sometimes that's what history is built on. David walked toward the black sedan waiting at the curb. He opened the door, placed his briefcase on the seat beside him, and paused one last time, not to reflect on what had been accomplished, but on what remained. Because he knew the truth. One moment can spark change. One person can expose truth. But only systems, strong, transparent, and accountable, can turn change into permanence. As he closed the door and the car pulled away, the camera crews missed him entirely. And that's exactly how he preferred it. He never wanted to be the headline. He wanted to be the reason headlines no longer needed to exist. And he had already begun to achieve it.